After living in their homes for years, many seniors may have trouble making their house payments. Whether it's due to lower income, higher medical bills, or other reasons, seniors need to know that they can avoid foreclosure. Attorney Eric Olsen, Executive Director of the Helps nonprofit law firm, wants seniors facing the loss of their homes to know that they do have options. As the founder of Helps, a nonprofit law firm that helps seniors nationwide with financial problems, the former bankruptcy attorney will explain various methods, including mortgage modification, property tax deferral, reverse mortgage, not paying other bills to devote resources to your mortgage, selling the home, declaring bankruptcy, and more. His advice could help you or a loved one save their home or save enough money to find another place to live. Because Eric is in Oregon and I'm in California, we will be conducting the interview via Zoom. Hey, it's Jeff Hoyt, Editor-in-Chief of SeniorLiving.Org, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Eric Olsen. Eric's an attorney and the Executive Director of the Helps nonprofit law firm. Welcome, Eric.
Good to be here, Jeff.
So, a big issue today with seniors is where they want to live, if they can afford to live where they've been living for years, if they retire, one of the spouses passes away, all of a sudden, like making a house payment can get to be very difficult. And, foreclosure is something that's sort of the big bad wolf at the door. So I'm just wondering, it's like if you're a senior facing foreclosure, facing losing your house in many years, what kind of options can you explore?
Well, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of solutions. The key is finding the best solution, the best answer for the problem. That's what it is. There's just a number of factors need to be analyzed.
And what are those factors?
Before I started Helps, I filed around 40,000 bankruptcies, okay? And a lot of those involved foreclosures, people that had problems with house payments. And in these kind of situations, there are a number of issues got to be looked at. Income versus how much is the house payment? How much equity there is in the house? The property taxes, how much are they each year? Is there a program in the state to defer the property taxes? Is there a second mortgage? What other debt does the person have? Is there a judgment? And for a senior, do they want to stay there? Or are they planning to sell in the near future? What's their plans? And then I guess, is there a foreclosure that's already happened, or it's pending, or there's a foreclosure sale that's really close? There's a lot of factors that have to be looked at.
That seems to be quite the list. So let's start with the worst case scenario. They get a letter in the mail after ignoring other payments or what have you, and it's like foreclosure happening soon. So they're facing down the barrel. What is it that they can do?
That might not be the worst case scenario, but I'll kind of shift. The worst case scenario is if there actually is a foreclosure file, okay? And there's generally two types of foreclosure. There's a judicial foreclosure, where papers are filed in court and they're served with a summons and a judge makes a decision, or there's what's called a trust deed foreclosure, where, and it depends on the state, and sometimes a lender has an option to what type of foreclosure they're going to file. But like, for example, on a trust deed foreclosure, a person might have like 4 months to catch up on the missed payment. If they don't, on a certain date, the property's gone. There's no redemption period. It's gone forever. A judicial foreclosure is, there might be it's a different type of procedure. But if a senior had a home and there was equity, and let's say there was a foreclosure and the home was going to be gone in a week, a couple days, maybe even, or a month, and it was really, really an emergency situation, and there was equity in the home we're saving and they wanted to try to stay there. One way to stop a foreclosure is through bankruptcy. There's two types, Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. Chapter 13 bankruptcy is a type of bankruptcy that can be filed where a person can stop a foreclosure and keep the home. And essentially what happens in a Chapter 13 is they file bankruptcy. When they file a Chapter 13 bankruptcy, there's an automatic stay, which means any legal action stops. And then the senior would file what's called a Chapter 13 plan, which would require them to resume making the mortgage payments, and they have up to 5 years to catch up on the missed mortgage payments. So if they owed 10,000 in missed payments, you take 10,000 divided by 60 months, they might have a $250 a month payment in addition to the regular mortgage payment. And there's different, a Chapter 13 can be designed to do different ways. It could be designed maybe that the person's going to maintain the payment and sell it within a year. Or there's a whole lot of different ways of dealing with it. But if there's a worst case scenario and a foreclosure is going to happen and the person is in danger of losing all that equity, which we don't want that to happen, then bankruptcy needs to be looked at.
So going down that road, if the person can't make their regular house payments, they're probably not going to be able to make the enhanced house payments where they're paying for the back payments plus that. So it's just sort of forestalls the sale of that forestalls the foreclosure until they can sell the house and get the equity out of it.
If you file a Chapter 13 and you can't even afford the mortgage payment, let alone the additional payment to catch up on the missed mortgage, then, you know, Chapter 13 for the long term isn't going to work, but it could buy you enough time to get the home sold so that you don't lose the equity in the home.
So we've been talking about a case where a foreclosure has been filed. Now, what if it's
Right.
imminent? What if it's about to be filed, but it hasn't been filed yet? You're worried about foreclosure.
Okay, so and that's kind of where were the factors we talked about earlier. I just talked to another helps attorney today and earlier, and we talked about how, you know, right now there's a lot of states have a hold on foreclosures, and there's not as many foreclosures being filed as you might think. I think banks have learned, boy, if they can work with someone, it's easier to have someone to keep making a payment than to get a home back. They lose in the long run. But you know, there are ways to solve a problem with a house. So, and I'll just talk about number one. So I'm the executive director of Helps nonprofit law firm. I started Helps because if I had 50 seniors in the room, probably 47, 48 out of, or 49 out of 50 seniors don't realize that their Social Security, their pension, their disability, the retirement income is protected by federal law. It doesn't need to be used to pay old debt they can't afford to pay. So if, you know, if a senior has so much income and they're paying a lot of that income on credit card or loans, they could choose to stop paying that debt. Their income can't be taken or garnished from them. Their Social Security is protected. And with that extra income, they might be able to afford to resume making that house payment or be able to afford to keep the home. So that's one factor.
So I have too many bills compared to my income, but if I don't pay credit card debt, let's say, which would mean losing the credit card, loss of credit score, things like that. But if I don't pay what I owe to the credit card, then I may have enough to make the house payment.
Exactly. So there's another thing we run into. I talk to a lot of seniors and they might have a house payment that's really big. Okay. For example, today I talked to a person who had a $275 a month car payment plus a $250 a month car insurance. So that's over $500 going out on a car payment and insurance when all they did is drive to the doctor and back or to the store without putting a penny of gas into the car. And so for some seniors, they can't afford to keep a house with a house payment and a car with a big car payment, and one needs to go, and it might be easier for a car to go back. And if the car goes back, boom, that gives $500 more into the budget, and they can afford to keep the home. Now, you know, we've got some other videos we did recently with Senior Living that talks about seniors and affordable transportation. There's ways for seniors to get cheaper transportation and solve that problem. But sometimes letting a car go back, in addition to not paying other creditors, will give you the extra money you can so you can keep the home.
That's certainly worth pursuing. Now, these homes, we're talking about paying off a mortgage. What if a property has a second mortgage? What can seniors do about that?
So a first mortgage is you go to your bank and, you know, they finance the home. A second mortgage is maybe you've gone and gotten a loan after you've gotten an initial mortgage. And usually it's a smaller amount of money and a smaller payment. And once in a while, I'll talk to a senior and I'll say, I'll ask them, well, if you didn't have to make the second mortgage payment, could you afford the first mortgage? And they'll say, yeah, I could. I should. And so as a practical matter, so I've been an attorney, 42 years. Okay. 40,000 bankruptcies. It is really rare for second mortgages to foreclose. Okay. Especially if there's not a whole lot of equity in the property. They just don't do it, because if for a second mortgage to foreclose, essentially they have to pay off the first mortgage, and then they have to pay the senior what's called a homestead exemption, the equity the state allows them to have in the home before. And that's a lot of money. And so they just don't do it. They just sit back and hope that they'll get paid when the home sells or some point in the future. So it is possible for seniors to stop making a second mortgage payment, and it's probably very unlikely that the second mortgage would choose to foreclose. Very unlikely.
Now, instead of trying to gather up enough money to pay for the first mortgage, is there a way to get the mortgage lowered?
If you've got enough equity and you got enough income and your credit looks good enough, you could refinance. There's also mortgage modification, and we hear a lot about that. There was a lot of mortgage modification happened after 2008. Now, under the CARES Act with COVID, there's been some hold on government-backed mortgage loans and encouraging lenders to enter into modification agreements, although they're not required to do that. And that may expire here really quickly. But lenders are pretty open to modifying. But you're not going to be able to modify a mortgage if you're current on everything. So in other words, if you're able to make the payment and you're struggling to make it, and you say, hey, I need to modify to get it lower, and you're current on the payment, they're not going to be too willing to do that because you're current on the payment. You have to be behind. There's a lot of different ways for a mortgage to be modified. One common way is to put the back at the end of the loan, or require a little bit extra payment. In a lot of ways, you're in control no matter what the lender may say, because they would prefer you to continue to resume making the payments than for them to foreclose. But yeah, you can modify a mortgage. Another thing that seniors could look into, a lot of states have programs for seniors who owe taxes to have the property taxes deferred or waived for different reasons. And it might have to, a lot of them require, you have to have under a certain amount of income. But if you're having a problem paying property taxes, there might be possible to get your property taxes waived. And then I guess there's one more thing we should talk about if they need a smaller payment, which is important. We've talked about it before, but we should mention reverse mortgages.
Yeah, so we did a whole video on reverse mortgages.
Yeah, we did.
I'll put the link in there. But
yeah.
In a nutshell, how would a reverse mortgage help a senior in this situation?
Okay, I don't sell reverse mortgages. And I would say that maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I didn't know anything about reverse mortgages. But since Founding Helps, I've learned a whole lot about reverse mortgages. And there's a lot of misinformation about reverse mortgages, Jeff, just a ton of it. And sometimes I'll tell a senior, I said, have you considered a reverse mortgage? They'll say, I don't want that. I'll ask them why. And they can't give me a reason except they heard something bad. So really quick, here's an example. In fact, it was from today. A lady called me. She didn't have a whole lot of income. The home was worth $150,000 approximately, and she only owed $30,000, and she was like almost 70 years old. And her payment on the mortgage took almost half her income. And she had good credit otherwise, but some debt. And I asked her, have you considered a reverse mortgage? And she didn't know anything about it. But in her situation, depending on your equity you have in your home, and it has to be like about 55%. So a reverse mortgage would pay off the first mortgage. So she'd no longer have a house payment, and she could live in the home to the day she died if she wanted to. She still has control of the house. She could sell it if she wanted to. But by getting a reverse mortgage, she would no longer have that first mortgage payment anymore. And that would make all the difference in the world. It would put $600 more in her budget. It would do, I mean, and so for a senior that has a house payment they can't afford, if they've got a lot of equity, a reverse mortgage is an answer to prayer for a lot of seniors. And once again, there's misinformation about that. It's not for everyone, but for a lot of seniors, it's really a good answer, and people should not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
And I'm sure it's one that doesn't usually come to mind, so it's good to have that option.
Yeah, you're right.
Attorney Eric Olsen has many more ideas for how you can hang on to your home despite the threat of foreclosure. To hear them, plus how his law firm can help you deal with your debts at no charge, watch the conclusion of our two-part interview, which will appear here and in the description below when published. Thanks.